The marble floor of the Whitmore Country Club caught the late afternoon sun like a sheet of pale gold, and for a moment, standing there in my navy blue dress that I'd bought on clearance 6 months ago, I thought maybe I belonged. Maybe a mother could belong at her only daughter's wedding reception, even if she'd spent the last 30 years scrubbing other people's kitchens to get her there. I was wrong. My name is Margaret Caldwell. I'm 63 years old, and until that Saturday in October, I would have told you my greatest accomplishment was raising Delilah alone after her father walked out on us when she was 4. I worked 3 jobs. I cleaned office buildings in downtown Charleston from 5 in the morning until 11. Then I waited tables at a diner until 4. Then I cleaned private homes until 9 at night. I did this for 22 years. I put my daughter through Duke University. I watched her graduate with honors. I cried when she got her first job at a marketing firm in Atlanta. I thought I had done something right. Then she met Preston Ashworth III. The Ashworths are what folks in the South call old money, the kind of money that buys silence from newspapers and smiles from senators. Preston's father owned half the real estate in Buckhead, and his mother sat on the board of every charity worth attending. When Delilah brought him home to meet me 2 years ago, I served pot roast in my little rental house in North Charleston, and I watched Preston wipe the fork on his napkin before he used it. I watched him glance at my framed pictures on the wall, the ones of Delilah in her cap and gown, and I watched his mouth twitch the way a man's mouth twitches when he smells something spoiled. My daughter didn't notice. Or maybe she did, and she'd already decided which side she was going to stand on. The wedding itself had been a circus. 400 guests, a 12-piece orchestra flown in from New York, centerpieces made of white orchids that cost more than my monthly rent. I sat in the 3rd row, not the front, because Preston's mother had rearranged the seating chart the morning of the ceremony. Delilah didn't say anything when I asked her about it. She just smoothed her dress and said, "Mom, please don't make this about you." I swallowed that. Mothers swallow a lot of things. But what I had in my purse, wrapped in brown paper and tied with a ribbon I'd cut from an old dress, was something I had been saving for 25 years. Ever since Delilah turned 3 and I started putting aside whatever I could. $1 here, $5 there, sometimes 10 when a client tipped me at Christmas. I'd opened a small Passbook account at First Carolina Savings, and I had written on the inside cover in my best handwriting, "For my daughter when she builds her own life." I'd never told her about it. I wanted it to be a surprise. The reception was in full swing when I found Delilah near the fountain in the garden. The fountain was the centerpiece of the club's back lawn, a massive thing of carved stone with 3 tiers and water that caught the light. She was laughing with Preston and a group of his college friends, her veil removed, a champagne glass in her hand. She looked beautiful. She looked like a stranger. "Delilah, honey," I said, approaching. "I have something for you. A wedding gift. From me." She turned, and for a second her face softened. For a second, she was my little girl again, the one who used to wait for me on the front steps at 9:30 at night because she couldn't fall asleep until I got home from cleaning the Hendersons' house. But then Preston's hand tightened on her waist, and I watched the softness drain out of her like water out of a cracked glass. "Mom, now's not really the time?" "It's just this," I said, holding out the brown paper package. "Open it when you get a chance. It's not much, but it's been a long time coming." Preston plucked it from my hand before Delilah could reach for it. He turned it over, weighed it in his palm, and gave me a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Well now, Mrs. Caldwell, what do we have here? A little something homemade?" He said the word homemade the way a man says roadkill. His friends laughed. "Preston, don't," Delilah said, but she was laughing too. He tore the brown paper open right there on the lawn, and the little passbook fell into his hand. Green vinyl, worn at the corners. I watched his face. I watched him flip it open. I watched his eyes land on the balance, and I watched him decide in one ugly heartbeat what he was going to do next. "A passbook?" he said, loud enough that conversations around us stopped. "Seriously? A savings account passbook?" For a wedding gift? He held it up in the air and waved it. Delilah, sweetheart, come look at what your mother gave us. My daughter stepped forward. She looked at the passbook. She looked at the small balance written in my tired handwriting. Her mouth opened, and I hoped, for one final, foolish second, that she would say something, that she would turn to him and say, "Preston, this is from my mother. Be kind." Instead, she laughed. A small, sharp laugh that I had never heard her make before. "Mom," she said, "is this a joke? Is this seriously just a few loose bills at my wedding?" "Delilah, this passbook is trash," Preston said, loud enough that a dozen people turned to look. "And you know what, Mrs. Caldwell? Honestly, your mom's just a cleaner anyway. What were you expecting?" And then my daughter, my Delilah, the child I had rocked through 2 bouts of pneumonia and 1 broken collarbone, the child I had fed ramen for 6 months so she could have a new winter coat, my daughter took the passbook from her husband's hand. She looked me in the eye, and she threw it into the fountain. It hit the water with a small, flat splash. The green vinyl floated for a moment, then began to sink. I stood there. The orchestra was playing somewhere behind me. Someone, a woman I didn't know, was snickering. Preston put his arm around my daughter and whispered something in her ear, and she nodded, and they turned away from me. I didn't cry. I didn't say a word. I reached into the fountain, fished the passbook out with my bare hand, shook the water off it, and put it in my purse. Then I walked across the lawn, past the string quartet, past the champagne tower, past the photographer who was still snapping pictures of the bride and groom, and I got in my 12-year-old Honda Civic, and I drove home. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen table with the wet passbook in front of me, and I thought about the last 25 years. I thought about every dollar. I thought about my hands, which are swollen at the knuckles now from 30 years of bleach and hot water. I thought about what my daughter had become and what I had let her become. And at 5 the next morning, I called Harrison Vance. Harrison had been my client for 18 years. I cleaned his penthouse in downtown Charleston every Tuesday and Friday. But Harrison wasn't just anyone. Harrison Vance was the chairman of First Carolina Savings Bank, and 35 years ago, before I was a cleaner, before Delilah was even born, I had been something else. I had been Margaret Caldwell, senior financial analyst at First Carolina, youngest woman to make vice president in the bank's history. I had left the job when Delilah was born because her father wanted a traditional wife, and then he'd left me anyway, and by the time I tried to go back, the industry had moved on. The cleaning work was supposed to be temporary. It lasted 30 years. But I had never closed that passbook account. And what my daughter and her husband didn't know, what nobody knew, except Harrison and the bank's private wealth division, was that 20 years ago, when my late sister Ruth passed away without any children, she had left me everything. Ruth had married well. Ruth had invested wisely. And Ruth's estate, which had been quietly accumulating interest in a trust I'd never touched, was attached to that same passbook. The passbook Preston had called trash. The passbook my daughter had thrown into a fountain. I had never spent a dime of Ruth's money. I'd wanted my daughter to grow up the way I had grown up, understanding the weight of a dollar. I'd wanted to give it to her the right way, at the right time, when she was ready to use it wisely. And I'd written her name on that account years ago as the sole beneficiary upon my death. The current balance, as of that morning, was $4,200,000. "Harrison," I said when he picked up the phone, "I need to come down to the bank today. I need to make some changes." "Margaret," he said, his voice soft with the kind of worry reserved for old friends, "is everything all right?" "No," I said, "but it's going to be." I walked into the main branch of First Carolina Savings at 9:15 that morning wearing the same navy dress from the wedding because I hadn't had the energy to change. The young teller at the front counter took one look at my passbook and went pale. "Ma'am," she whispered, "please do not leave. Let me get Mr. Vance immediately." Harrison came out of his office himself. He took me to a private conference room on the 14th floor, the one with the view of the harbor, and he poured me a cup of coffee from a silver pot, and he said, "Tell me what happened." I told him all of it. The wedding, the fountain, the words, Preston's smirk, Delilah's laugh. Harrison listened without interrupting. When I was done, he was silent for a long moment. "Margaret," he said finally, "you understand what you're holding. You understand what that passbook represents." "I do." "And you want to make changes." "I do. Tell me what you want." I had thought about it all night. I had made my decisions in the dark, with the water stains still drying on the green vinyl. "First," I said, "I want the beneficiary on this account changed. Immediately. Delilah Ashworth is no longer my beneficiary. I want you to draft a new document naming the Charleston Women's Recovery Foundation as the primary beneficiary, with a secondary gift to the scholarship fund at Charleston State College." Harrison nodded slowly and made a note. "Second," I said, "I want to look into my son-in-law, Preston Ashworth III, his family's holdings, his personal finances, whatever First Carolina's private banking division can find out through legitimate channels. I have reason to believe that what he presents publicly and what he actually is may be two different things." Harrison leaned back in his chair and looked at me. "Margaret, what are you planning?" "I'm not planning anything illegal," I said. "I just want to know who my daughter married, and I want you to tell me honestly." He nodded. "Give me a week." It took 4 days. Harrison called me on Thursday morning and asked me to come back to the bank. When I arrived, he took me to the same conference room, and this time there was another man with him, a man in a dark suit named Calloway, who introduced himself as the head of the bank's fraud investigation unit. "Margaret," Harrison said, "you need to hear this sitting down. Preston Ashworth III, it turned out, was not what he appeared to be. The Ashworth family fortune had been evaporating for over a decade. Bad real estate investments in 2008, a cousin who'd embezzled from the family trust in 2015, a sister who'd married a man who'd convinced them all to invest in a crypto venture that turned out to be a Ponzi scheme. The family's public image, the galas, the charity boards, the estate in Buckhead was held together with debt and the sheer force of Margaret Ashworth's social connections. Preston's personal finances were worse. He had 3 credit cards at their limit. He owed $200,000 to a private lender in Savannah. He had been fired from his job at Morgan Stanley 8 months ago for what the HR report delicately called ethical concerns, which in plain English meant he had been moving client funds through accounts he controlled. Morgan Stanley had made the problem disappear because of his family name. He had not told Delilah any of this, and then Calloway slid a photograph across the table. "Mrs. Caldwell," he said, "are you familiar with a woman named Vanessa Whitley?" I was not. "She's the heiress to the Whitley timber fortune. She's also currently 7 months pregnant, and for the last 3 years, she has been in an exclusive relationship with your son-in-law, who has promised to marry her once his first marriage is resolved. The first marriage being, as of last Saturday, your daughter." I looked at the photograph. It was a picture of Preston, laughing, with his arm around a young woman with a visible pregnancy. The timestamp on the photograph was 2 weeks before my daughter's wedding. I closed my eyes. Here's the thing about being a mother. You can be furious with your child. You can be heartbroken by her. You can watch her throw your love into a fountain and call it trash. But the moment you understand that someone else has hurt her, that someone else is using her, something rises up in you that has nothing to do with pride or reason. I opened my eyes. "Harrison," I said, "what do we do?" "We did a lot of things." Over the next 2 weeks, First Carolina Savings filed a routine banking inquiry into the Ashworth Family Trust, which triggered a federal audit because of irregularities that had been overlooked for years. I, personally, hired a private attorney named Eleanor Reyes, a woman I had once cleaned for during her divorce, who now owed me a favor and then some. Eleanor contacted Vanessa Whitley's family attorney, not to threaten or expose, but simply to confirm what we already knew and to make sure that young woman had proper legal representation. Because whatever Preston had done to my daughter, he had done worse to Vanessa, and that girl deserved to know she wasn't alone. And I waited. I waited 3 weeks. I did not call Delilah. I did not respond to the 2 voicemails she left, both of them asking if I was over it yet and wondering when I was going to apologize for making a scene. I did not answer the text message her mother-in-law sent, the one that said, in words I will not repeat here, that I was an embarrassment and should not contact the family again. I cleaned houses. I went to church. I visited Ruth's grave and told her what was happening. I felt her laughing somewhere. On the first Monday of November, the story broke in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Ashworth Family Trust under federal audit, here named in second relationship. My phone rang at 7:13 in the morning. Mom. My daughter's voice, small, shaking. Mom, are you there? I'm here. Mom, something terrible has happened. Something there, reporters outside. There's something you need to see, trust me. Again, another woman, and Mom, I need Delilah, I said. Come to my house. Alone. Not Preston, not his mother. You. She came. She showed up at my door 2 hours later in sweatpants and a Duke hoodie. The same hoodie I'd bought her at the campus bookstore the weekend I moved her into her freshman dorm. Her face was swollen from crying. She looked like my little girl again. I didn't hug her. I wanted to. I didn't. I made her a cup of tea and sat her down at my kitchen table, the same table where I had sat 3 weeks ago with a wet passbook in front of me. And I told her what I knew, all of it. Vanessa, the pregnancy, the embezzlement, the debt, the federal audit. She listened. She cried. She asked me how I knew. Because, I said, I went looking after the wedding. Mom, I'm so sorry. Delilah, stop. I don't want to hear it yet. I want you to listen to me first. I pulled the passbook out of my purse. The green vinyl was still a little warped from the water. I set it on the table between us. Do you remember what this was? Mom, please. Do you remember what you called it? She began to sob. Trash. I called it trash. I threw it in the fountain. That passbook, I said, was attached to an account I opened the year you turned 3. I put money into it every month for 25 years. $5, $10, whatever I could spare. It was going to be my gift to you, a start, something of your own. Mom. And your Aunt Ruth, when she died 20 years ago, left me her entire estate. I never touched it. I added it to that same account under your name as the beneficiary. Do you know what the balance was on the morning of your wedding? She shook her head. $4 million, Delilah. $4,200,000. That is what you threw in the fountain. That is what your husband called trash. That is what you laughed at. She stared at me. Her mouth opened. No sound came out. And the reason I'm telling you this now, I said, is not to hurt you. It's because I need you to understand something. I need you to understand who you are and who you were becoming and what it cost. Mom, please, if you told me no. I shook my head. No, sweetheart, this is the part you have to hear. If I had told you, you wouldn't have changed. You would have hugged me and you would have married Preston anyway, and you would have spent the rest of your life believing that I was worth something because I had money. And when the money was gone, I would have been worth nothing again, the way I was worth nothing to you on Saturday. She was crying too hard to speak. I changed the beneficiary on Monday morning, I said. The account no longer goes to you. It goes to a women's recovery foundation here in Charleston. Do you understand why? She nodded. She did understand. I could see it on her face. She understood. Preston is going to go to prison, Delilah, not because of me, because of what he did. The federal audit is going to find everything. The woman named Vanessa is going to have her baby, and that baby is going to grow up without a father, and you are going to have to decide who you are in the middle of all of that. And I can't decide for you. But I want you to know something. I reached across the table and took her hand. Her hand, which was smaller than mine, which had once fit inside mine when she was 4 years old, and we walked to the bus stop in the rain. I still love you, I said. I will always love you. But love is not the same as trust, and trust has to be rebuilt from the bottom. the same way I built that account. $1 at a time. One day at a time. One day at a time. For years. And I don't know if you have it in you. I hope you do. But you have to show me. And even if you never get the money back, even if you spend the rest of your life broke, I need you to build something real. Because a woman who doesn't know her own worth will let any man write her a price tag. She put her head down on the table and wept. I let her. I did not touch her hair. Not yet. She stayed that night in her old room. She called me Mama for the first time in 10 years when she came down for breakfast in the morning. We did not speak about Preston. We did not speak about the money. She went back to Atlanta that afternoon, and I did not know if I would ever see her again. The divorce took 11 months. Preston pled guilty to wire fraud and was sentenced to 6 years. His mother sold the Buckhead estate to pay the settlements. Vanessa Whitley had a baby girl and named her Ruth, although she did not know that was my sister's name, and I took that as a small sign from somewhere. My daughter moved back to Charleston in the spring. She got a job at a nonprofit, making $40,000 a year. She rented a 1-bedroom apartment 3 blocks from my house. She comes over every Sunday for dinner. She does not ask about the money. I do not mention it. Last week, she brought me a small package, wrapped in brown paper, tied with a ribbon. Inside was a passbook, a little green vinyl thing with a balance of $314. I started saving, she said, a year ago, for my own start, $1 at a time. I opened it. I saw her handwriting, careful and a little shaky, on the inside cover, from my mother, who taught me what a gift is really worth. I cried then. I didn't cry at the wedding. I didn't cry when I saw the photograph of Vanessa. I didn't cry when I changed the beneficiary on the account. But I cried then, because here is what I have learned after 63 years on this earth, and what I want to tell you tonight if you've listened this far. The world will tell you that the value of a gift is the number written on the check. The world will tell you that a cleaner is worth less than a banker, and a mother is worth less than a mother-in-law, and an old woman in a navy dress from the clearance rack is worth less than the orchids on the centerpiece. The world is a liar. The real gift is always the one you cannot see. It is the years someone stayed up waiting for you. It is the coats they went without so you could have yours. It is the passbook they filled, $1 at a time, because they believed you would someday be worth more than the money. And if someone ever tells you that a passbook is trash, my friend, look at them very carefully, because what they are really telling you is who they are. I kept the wet passbook. It sits on my mantle now, next to a photograph of Delilah at her Duke graduation. The pages are warped, the ink is smudged, but the writing on the inside cover is still there, in my tired handwriting from 25 years ago. For my daughter, when she builds her own life. She's building it. That is the only inheritance that ever mattered.